Hi, I'm Carl Herzog, Public Historian for the USS Constitution Museum. And this is a picture of USS Constitution. Uh, yeah, she's in there. It's kind of hard to see. She's like the fourth ship back on the second pier. Yeah, there it is. That's her. You can make out the masts a little bit. She's not exactly the most prominent ship in the foreground in this photo. This photo was actually taken in the mid 1930s in the Charlestown Navy Yard here in Boston, where Constitution was still berthed at the time. She'd just come back from a national cruise after a massive renovation, but she was back home at this port at the Navy Yard in Boston. She doesn't stand out as much, though, because at the time, the Charlestown Navy Yard was still a very active naval shipyard. It continued to be until 1974. I suspect most of the people who come to visit Constitution don't think that much initially about the Charlestown Navy Yard. But it's an incredibly fascinating place, and it is intricately tied to the history of USS Constitution. If you're not familiar with the geography of Boston, this is a nautical chart of Boston Harbor from the era of the Revolution, showing Boston at the bottom half of the chart and Charlestown just across the Charles River, and sort of in the center middle of the chart, just below the Mystic River. A lot of this waterway has been filled in since then to create the rest of both Boston, Charlestown, and Cambridge, and a variety of other ports and wharfs. But even at this point, there was already some shipbuilding repair activity going on along the Charlestown waterfront. But there wasn't a Navy shipyard there. In the north end of Boston, near what is marked as North Battery on this chart, would later be Edmund Hart's shipyard, which is where Constitution was constructed and launched in 1797. In 1801, just a few years after that, was when the government decided to establish a Navy Yard in Charlestown along the Charlestown waterfront. The Navy shipyard that opened in the beginning of the 1800s lasted 174 years, not closing until 1974. During that time, hundreds upon hundreds of ships were both built and repaired in this yard. Now, this might all be a separate story that has nothing to do with USS Constitution, except that it does. From the very beginning of the Charlestown Navy Yard all the way up through its closure as a formal Navy Yard and continuing on as a national park since then, Constitution has been a constant visitor and later permanently berthed here at the Yard. When the first dry dock was opened in 1833, she was the first ship to go into that dry dock. And when her anniversary of her 100th, the 100th anniversary of her launch was celebrated in 1897, she came back to the Charlestown Navy Yard, where she's essentially been based ever since. So if you come to visit Constitution, you'll be visiting her here in the Charlestown Navy Yard. Well, I say here, I'm at home right now. Because Constitution has such a long history of being in the Navy Yard, a lot of the buildings that are still preserved here have served Constitution in one way or another, or are connected to her through crew members and other services that she relied on as well. On the USS Constitution Museum's website, we have a new page called Explore the Navy Yard, where you can take a look at a map of the portion of the Navy Yard that's still preserved as a national park. At the time that the Charlestown was operating as an active duty Navy Yard, the yard itself extended over the entire waterfront of Charlestown. When the yard was shut down in 1974, a portion of it was preserved for the national park, and another portion of it was turned over to the city to be redeveloped. Although even in that area, there are an extensive number of original buildings that were built to serve U.S. Navy ships, not the least of which is the long rope walk where rope was made, and the huge chain forge or massive amounts of anchor chain. In World War II alone, they made just enough to stretch from Charlestown to Cape Fear, Carolina. All of this was made in the yard. It's really incredible. In the area right around Constitution, you can see the dry dock that Constitution has come in and out of as recently as her most recent renovation in 2015 to 2017. And the Constitution Museum itself, which once we reopen you'll have an opportunity to visit, is intimately connected to the ship's own history because the museum building itself was the steam pump house that filled and drained water for dry dock number 1 right out in front, where Constitution was the very first ship to enter in 1833 and the most recent one to be there from 2015 to 2017. There are a variety of other interesting points that of interest around the Navy Yard right adjacent to Constitution that you can see from right out in front of either the ship or the museum itself. In addition to the dry dock, there's the Commandant's house, which is directly connected to at least a half a dozen Constitution captains and crew members who later became commandants of the Charlestown Navy Yard later on in their careers. Building number 10, located directly across from the dry dock, was originally a pitch and oakum loft, and it has since been converted into a million other uses, the most recent of which is a snack bar for visitors when they're visiting the Navy Yard when it's open. Oakum was the shredded up hemp that was used in between planking to keep it secure and watertight, and pitch and tar was the boiled down pine sap that was used to finally seal it and make ships watertight. There's a number of other locations with similar kinds of connections to the ship here, and I encourage you to come visit our website and see the rich history of this particular Navy Yard as it ties back to Constitution. And when Constitution and the Navy Yard are reopened once again, you'll be able to visit not only some of these sites, but Constitution and the USS Constitution Museum as well. Thanks a lot.